Two different federal courts looked at the same company and the same government action, the same set of facts, and arrived at completely opposite conclusions. One judge in San Francisco called the Pentagon's move Orwellian, but a three-judge panel in DC said they wouldn't lightly override the military's judgment on national security. Now, both rulings are in effect right now. Both apply to Anthropic, and that contradiction, a company simultaneously protected and constrained by federal law, is the most honest picture that we've gotten yet of what it looks like when institutions that were built for one era are trying to adjudicate the next one in real time. And that's where we're going to start today. So let's reestablish the timeline. Back in February, this started as a contract dispute. The Pentagon wanted Anthropic to agree that Claude could be used for, quote, all lawful purposes. Anthropic said no. The model has built-in safety constraints, and those aren't negotiable. But the Pentagon responded by slapping a supply chain risk designation on the company, you'll remember, essentially blacklisting it from federal procurement. Now, Judge Lin in San Francisco reviewed the evidence and found strong indicators that the Pentagon acted on bad faith, that this wasn't about security at all, but about a government agency being told no by a company and deciding to punish that company. And yesterday, the DC Circuit, a different court applying a different statute, looked at the same situation and said, we defer to the military on national security matters. They didn't evaluate whether the designation was legally sound. They didn't engage with whether the Pentagon acted on bad faith. They just said, essentially, we're not going to second guess the armed forces on what constitutes a supply chain risk. And the acting attorney general called it a resounding victory for military readiness, which tells you exactly how the executive branch reads this, as confirmation perhaps that the commander-in-chief decides which AI systems that the military uses, full stop. But here's what this means for you and for everyone building or using these systems. Right now, Anthropic exists in a state of legal suspension. One court says the company's safety commitments are protected, but another court says the military gets to decide what's a risk. On May 19th, that's when the oral arguments happen, here a little more than a month away. What comes out of those arguments won't just determine Anthropic's fate, but it'll set the precedent for whether any AI company can maintain safety constraints when a government says, we need this tool without limits. So every lab, every developer, and every researcher that is working on frontier systems is watching this to find out whether building in guardrails is a right or a liability. That's the stakes here. The Century Report has covered this confrontation since February. On March 27th, Judge Lin used the word Orwellian in her ruling. That language now sits in direct tension with the DC's circuit's deference. And the broader trajectory tells us something really important here. The legal framework governing how intelligence systems relate to state power isn't really being written by legislators. It's being hammered out case by case by judges who are interpreting statutes that were drafted decades before any of this technology existed. The frameworks are emerging from friction, not from a design of any kind. While Anthropic was navigating constitutional limbo, Meta shipped the first result of the most expensive AI reset in industry history, Muse Spark, the product of 9 months, $14.3 billion invested in Scale AI's Alexander Wang, and hundreds of millions in individual poaching packages, and a complete teardown and rebuild of Meta's entire AI stack. And here's the honest version of what they got for that money. A model that's genuinely exceptional at some things, and still significantly behind on others. So here's the exceptional part, first of all. Muse Spark leads every model tested on the Health Bench Hard, which is a medical reasoning evaluation, 42.8%. Claude Opus scores only 14.8%. That's Claude Opus 4.6, scoring only 14.8% on that same test. So this isn't a marginal lead, right? That's nearly 3 times even the closest competitor. It also leads on interpreting scientific charts and figures from images, reasoning benchmark. Now, these are domains where Meta's unique advantage really kicks in. 3 billion users generating health queries, sharing images, interacting with visual content, and that's training signal that nobody else really has. Here's the gap. On abstract reasoning, the ARC AGI2 benchmark, Muse Spark scores 42.5%. Now, Gemini 3.1 Pro scores 76.5%. That's a canyon gap. Meta built a mode called contemplating, and it runs multiple agents in parallel to tackle harder problems, very similar to GPT-5's committee structure. It helps, but it doesn't quite close the distance. And then there's the decision that will frustrate a lot of people who've been cheering Meta on. Muse Spark is closed source. Meta spent years building goodwill with the open source community through Llama. Researchers built on it, startups shipped products with it. But Muse Spark breaks that promise with only a vague gesture toward open sourcing future versions. So the commercial pressure to sell API access and compete with Anthropic and OpenAI on enterprise revenue won out over the strategy of being the open platform that everyone builds on. Now, here's what I find genuinely interesting about this, and where I think most coverage will stop. Meta's strength isn't general reasoning, it's specificity. The model is strongest exactly where Meta's data is deepest. Health, visual understanding, shopping behavior. Meta is also building a mode that draws on creator content and user behavior across Instagram, Facebook, and Threads to help you find products. Nobody else can build that feature. It only works because Meta has the behavioral data. And this points towards something that the benchmarks don't capture yet. We're moving past the era where there's one single best model and everyone's trying to catch up to that best model. In fact, it's never really been that way. Every model has been good at different things, but there's typically been one that's always been kind of above the other, and they just keep kind of one-upping each other. But what's forming now is this ecosystem where different models are really starting to cement themselves as dominant in different domains, and they're defined by the data environments that they live in. So Meta won't out-reason Gemini, but Gemini won't out-diagnose Meta. And the competitive landscape, really, that's not converging, it's more stratifying out. And that stratification might actually be better for you because it means the model that your doctor uses and the model your developer uses don't need to be the same model. It doesn't need to be the everything product that OpenAI decided they wanted to be from the beginning and have kind of suffered for that since. They need to be the best model just for that particular job. So going too big has kind of been something that most companies have regretted. OpenAI went too big from the very beginning, and Anthropic took advantage of that by kind of putting their product in the niche areas where people would have the most needs, such as code and such as now office products and things like that. And Anthropic has thrived because of that, and OpenAI has done the opposite. They've struggled. So the more and more companies that are kind of finding their niche and focusing more on the kind of small model mindset, not necessarily small as in fitting on a small device small, but small as in specialized, they've had a lot of success. So it may be that Meta's trying to kind of follow that same niche market direction. Now, on the same day that Meta shipped a model, Anthropic shipped something that looks like the next layer up, Claude managed agents. And I think this might be even bigger than Meta, poor Meta, trying so hard. Here's the distinction. A model answers questions and an agent does things, takes actions, uses external tools, and operates in the world. We know this. We've been using agents for a while and Anthropic thrives on it. Until yesterday, if you wanted to deploy a fleet of AI agents in your company, say, so agents that onboard new clients or monitor workflows or process invoices, you had to build all the surrounding infrastructure yourself. So you use Claude Code typically, or maybe if you're an OpenAI person, you use Codex, or maybe a mix of the two. The sandbox each agent runs in, you had to build that. The permissions it has, the credentials it can access, the checkpoints so you can recover if something goes wrong. That was a lot of engineering work that most teams had to do by themselves, or you had to do by yourself individually. But Claude managed agents essentially wrappers all of that. It moves all of that to Anthropic's side so that you can simply describe what the agents individually should do. And Anthropic provides the execution environment, the credential management, the permission controls, the monitoring dashboard. So Notion demoed it yesterday. Fleets of Claude agents working through client onboarding tasks, ticking off items one by one while a human watches the dashboard and steps in only when something needs judgment. So think about what shifted here. The bottleneck for deploying AI agents in your organization used to be, can your engineering team build the infrastructure? Do you know how to work with agents simultaneously, to set them up simultaneously in an environment like VS Code or Cursor or Claude Code, whatever you're using? As of yesterday, the bottleneck is now, what do you want the agents to do? And that's it. It's a completely different question. So it moves the constraint from technical capability to organizational imagination. And we keep seeing this happening over and over. Claude Cowork was a similar leap. The capability of Claude Cowork had always been there, but you had to know how to do it. And then Cowork kind of rapifies it into something more friendly. So, and it means the companies that benefit first won't necessarily be the ones with the biggest engineering teams. They'll be the ones that understand their own workflows well enough to describe them clearly. And so that advantage shifts from who can build it to who knows what needs actual doing. But there's a security dimension here, and it really deserves a hard look. A survey from the SANS Institute, which was also published yesterday, found that 3/4 of organizations are seeing really rapid growth in non-human identities. So this is service accounts, API keys, automation credentials. 74% already have AI agents that need credentials to operate. And 92% of those can't rotate the credentials on a 90-day cycle. Now that number is potentially really problematic. It means that the vast majority of organizations that are deploying agents right now have more machine identities than they are able to track. And those identities stay valid far longer than security best practices really allow. The agents are deploying faster than the governance, and the governance question really isn't when will it catch up, because the deployment pace isn't slowing down. So that gap is just going to get bigger. The real question is what security looks like when the number of non-human actors in your organization permanently exceeds and continues to exceed the number of human ones. And that requires completely new architecture, not faster versions of the old. Okay, let's shift away and talk about energy again. First, Fervo signed a 1.75 gigawatt turbine supply agreement with Turboden America. This is nearly 3 dozen 50 megawatt organic Rankine cycle turbines, and it's delivered over the next 3 years. This is about enhanced geothermal. So this is the technology where you drill deep and you inject water and you pull up heat then from the Earth's crust. The drilling side of this has been solved. Fervo's Cape Station in Utah is already under construction. Occidental drilled twin boreholes in under 6 weeks last month, which was a record. You might remember we covered that. But what hasn't been solved was the surface plant. So the turbines that convert that heat into electricity. There are a handful of manufacturers globally, and lead times are pushed past 18 months now, and the production capacity wouldn't match the ambition. But yesterday's deal changes that. Combined with existing Cape Station contracts, Fervo can now have turbine capacity for over 2.2 gigawatts, and that's more than half of all currently installed US geothermal capacity in just one company's pipeline. Second, New Jersey repealed its nuclear construction moratorium. Governor Sherrill signed it at the Hope Creek Generating Station. This is a plant that, along with the adjacent Salem plant, provides 80% of New Jersey's carbon-free electricity. The moratorium dated to the 1970s and required federal solution for nuclear waste disposal before new construction could begin. Now that solution, Yucca Mountain, was abandoned in 2009. The condition was, in the governor's words, one that cannot be met. And meanwhile, intermediate storage containers have maintained a 100% safety record across 35 states now for 4 decades. So New Jersey is the 6th state in a decade to lift its moratorium, and just a second this year. That 40 years is looking safer and safer as far as permanent storage of nuclear material. And this is bipartisan. This is a Democratic governor fulfilling a campaign promise. And so they're driven not by ideology, but by simple arithmetic. Data center demand is growing. Climate targets are still there, and fossil fuels are rough on the environment. More and more people are recognizing that no single technology will fill this gap alone. And indeed, it's looking more and more like nuclear is the filler of the gap from now to whatever the next generation of energy will be, which we are seeing roll out with batteries and renewables and things like that. Okay, third, and this one's harder. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, warned yesterday that Iranian-affiliated hackers have disrupted programmable logic controllers across multiple US critical infrastructure sectors, including energy. PLCs are the devices that control substation automation, they generate plant operations, and they distribute power as well. Between 50 and 80% of US grid control endpoints depend on these. The advisory described hackers manipulating software configurations and data displays on supervisory control systems, which causes, of course, operational disruption and financial loss. So NERC confirmed it's actively monitoring the grid right now. So hold all 3 of these stories at once. The clean energy build out is accelerating. Turbines are secured, moratoria is falling, and gigawatt scale projects are moving from paper to actual steel. And the digital nervous system that will manage all of that new capacity is under active attack by a state actor in the 6th week of an armed conflict. The infrastructure being built at unprecedented speed and security threats targeting that infrastructure, those are both scaling together. This isn't a problem that gets solved one time. It's a condition that we have to manage continuously, especially if we're going to continue to be violent with one another. And the same AI capability that Anthropic demonstrated with Mythos this week, finding vulnerabilities at machine speed, is exactly the kind of a defensive tool the grid needs. The offense and the defense are running on the same technology. The question is, which one's going to stay ahead? All right, let's move to releases. A lot of releases today, but let's talk about just a few. Google launched Gemini Notebooks, which is topic-specific workspaces that you can organize files, past conversations, and custom instructions. So it's very similar to ChatGPT or Anthropic's projects folders, right? But Gemini uses all of it as context, and it actually syncs with Notebook LM. Liquid AI released a vision language model, and this is small enough to run on edge devices, and it processes images in 240 milliseconds and can do real-time reasoning on actual video streams at 4 frames per second. So this is an AI vision kind of running on a camera and not in a data center. And NVIDIA released its Omniverse libraries in early access. This is standalone components for RTX rendering, PhysX simulation, and data storage that developers can embed directly into, say, robotics or industrial applications. And it's headless first, right? And it's modular. The building blocks for physical AI getting pulled out of the platform and the UI and being made available as parts. Here's what I'm going to leave you with today. The legal system is trying to answer a question it does not have a precedent for. Whether the values embedded in an AI system are speech to be protected or risk to be contained. 2 courts gave opposite answers in the same week about the same company, applying to the same facts. May 19th will start to resolve it. Meanwhile, the commercial layer is splitting in 2 directions simultaneously. Models are stratifying by data advantage. Your best medical AI and your best reasoning AI may never be the same product. And the infrastructure for deploying agents is hardening into something turnkey, which means the constraint moves from engineering to intention, from can we build it to what should it do? And beneath all of it, the physical grid, turbines, reactors, and solar farms, is being assembled at historic speed while adversaries probe its control systems in real time. Now, very soon, watch for the May 19th appellate arguments, because the precedent set there will ripple through every AI company's relationship with every government. And watch for Fervo's Cape Station to come online, because when it does, enhanced geothermal stops being a promise and starts being power on the grid. And watch for SANS credential rotation numbers next quarter, because if 92% of organizations still can't manage their machine identities, then the agent era's security gap is not closing, but widening. We'll see you tomorrow.